John sat by the flickering light of a single candle in his small wooden hut, his head heavy with worry. His 3 children, with hollow cheeks and tired eyes, huddled around an empty table. Dinner had been nothing but scraps, a few crusts of bread, barely enough to keep their hunger at bay. His youngest, Mary, tugged at his sleeve, her voice barely above a whisper. "Papa, will we have food tomorrow?" John's heart ached. He had worked tirelessly for the wealthy billionaire Sam, doing odd jobs on his farm. Today was supposed to be payday, but no money had come. The thought of his children going another day hungry filled him with despair. He glanced outside at Robin, his loyal but frail horse. The creature had seen better days, much like John himself. With a deep sigh, John made up his mind. "Stay here, children. I'll go get what's owed to us," he said, his voice firm but laced with uncertainty. As he saddled Robin, the horse neighed softly, as if sensing the weight of the journey ahead. The night was cold, and the road to the mansion was long, but John had no choice. His children were counting on him, and he wouldn't let them down. With determination in his eyes and hope in his heart, John set off, unaware of the unexpected turn his night was about to take. As John rode through the dark countryside on Robin, the cool breeze did little to ease the heaviness in his heart. He thought of his children's faces, their pleading eyes asking for food he couldn't provide. Each step Robin took seemed to echo his doubts. What if Mr. Sam refuses to pay tonight? What if he doesn't even see me? John gripped the reins tightly, his knuckles white with worry. He had worked hard, tending to Sam's vast lands during whatever spare hours he could find. Surely the billionaire would understand his plight. John clung to this hope like a lifeline, though deep down, a nagging fear lingered. As the mansion came into view, John felt his stomach twist. Lights blazed from every window. Music and laughter spilled out into the night air. Something was different. This wasn't an ordinary evening. Unbeknownst to him, a grand party was underway, filled with the city's wealthiest elites. Still, John pressed on. "They might laugh at me, but I have no choice," he thought, glancing at Robin. The horse let out a soft whinny as if encouraging him. Taking a deep breath, John straightened his back and rode toward the mansion gates, hopeful yet anxious about what lay ahead. The mansion stood like a glowing palace against the dark sky, its towering walls bathed in golden light. Crystal chandeliers hung from every window, sparkling like stars. The grand driveway was lined with sleek cars that gleamed under the brilliance of the lights. Guests in elegant suits and glittering gowns moved gracefully, their laughter and chatter filling the air. John pulled the reins as Robin approached the gates, his breath catching at the sheer extravagance before him. He had never seen such luxury. The simple cotton shirt and patched trousers he wore seemed like a mockery in this world of wealth. Beside him, Robin, with his matted fur and tired legs, stood out painfully against the polished perfection of the surroundings. As John rode past, the ornate fountain that danced with water lit by colored lights, heads began to turn. Whispers followed, spreading like wildfire among the guests. Who was this man in tattered clothes? And his horse, old and weak, what was it doing here? John felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment, but he kept his eyes on the grand entrance. "I have a purpose. I'm here for my children," he reminded himself. The glittering world around him felt like a dream he didn't belong in, but he had no idea that this very night would soon turn his life upside down. As John dismounted Robin near the grand entrance, the chatter of the partygoers came to an abrupt halt. All eyes turned toward him, their expressions a mix of shock, amusement, and disdain. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the soft clink of a champagne glass. Then came the laughter. "Who let that in here?" A man in a tailored suit sneered, pointing at Robin. A woman in a sparkling gown covered her mouth as she giggled. "Is this some kind of joke? A horse at a party?" "Look at his clothes," someone whispered loudly. "Did he come from a time machine?" The comments grew louder, each one cutting through John like a knife. He stood there, frozen, wishing he could sink into the ground and disappear. Robin shifted uneasily, sensing the hostility. John placed a hand on the horse's neck, trying to steady both of them. Inside, his heart was heavy with regret. "Why did I come here?" he thought. "I should have waited. I should have found another way." But it was too late to turn back now. Swallowing his pride, he stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the door, determined to find Mr. Sam and claim what he had earned. Little did John know, the night's cruel mockery was only the beginning of something far more extraordinary. The mocking laughter was cut short by a sudden, piercing scream. It echoed through the mansion, silencing the chatter and freezing everyone in place. John turned toward the source of the commotion, his heart pounding. Near the edge of the massive pool, a small figure flailed helplessly in the water. It was a young boy, his terrified cries barely audible as he struggled to stay afloat. The boy's face was pale, his arms thrashing wildly, his head bobbing in and out of the water. "Someone, help him!" a woman's voice shrieked, but no one moved. The wealthy guests, dressed in their pristine clothes, hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. Some stepped back, unwilling to risk their outfits or their safety. John's eyes darted to Billionaire, Sam, who stood paralyzed by the poolside, his face etched with horror. "My son! My son!" he cried, his voice cracking with desperation. "Help him, please!" But the crowd remained rooted, their fear outweighing their compassion. The tension in the air was suffocating. Every second felt like an eternity. John clenched his fists, his mind racing. "This isn't right," he thought. Without a second thought, he turned to Robin, determination blazing in his eyes. The time for hesitation was over. Without a moment's hesitation, John kicked off his worn boots and dashed toward the pool. The boy's struggles were weakening, his tiny body slipping beneath the surface. John's heart pounded as he leapt into the water, the icy chill biting at his skin. The crowd gasped in unison, their disbelief etched on their faces. The poor farmer, the man they had mocked just moments ago, was now risking his life for a child none of them had dared to save. The water was deeper than John had anticipated, and his muscles strained as he swam toward the boy. His arms cut through the water with determination, his fear of drowning drowned out by a single thought. "I must save him." When he reached the boy, John wrapped one arm around him and kicked hard toward the surface. The child was limp, his face pale, but there was still a faint breath of life in him. John held him close, his own strength beginning to wane as he dragged the boy toward the edge of the pool. The guests stood frozen, their luxury gowns and suits forgotten as they watched in stunned silence. The farmer they had laughed at was now a hero before their very eyes. John hauled the boy out of the water, his heart racing. The young child's skin was cold to the touch, his chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged breaths. His eyes were half closed, and his lips had turned a ghostly shade of blue. John's hands trembled as he gently placed the boy on the cold stone, trying to steady his own panic. "Please don't let him be gone," he thought, his mind racing. The boy was barely breathing, each breath a struggle, and John could feel his pulse quicken with fear. Billionaire Sam, his face pale with terror, fell to his knees beside the child. "My son, please, help him!" he cried, his voice shaking. His eyes searched the crowd desperately. "Someone get my car! Hurry!" A few of the guests looked around nervously, but no one moved. The nearest cars were parked in the basement, a long distance away, and Sam's desperation only seemed to make them hesitate more. John's heart sank as he saw Sam's helplessness, the once confident billionaire now broken with worry. The tension was unbearable, and time seemed to stretch as everyone stood frozen. John looked down at the child, feeling the weight of the moment. He had to act, but the clock was ticking. In a split second, John made his decision. He didn't wait for permission, didn't ask anyone for help. He couldn't afford to waste another second. His heart raced as he gently lifted the boy into his arms, holding him close as he moved toward Robin. The crowd watched in stunned silence as John carefully placed the fragile child on the back of his old horse. The once ridiculed horse, Robin, seemed to understand the urgency. The animal stood still, steady beneath the boy's limp body, as if ready for the task at hand. John wasted no time. He jumped onto Robin's back, his heart pounding in his chest. With a swift kick, Robin galloped forward, the horse's hooves thundering against the ground as they raced toward the nearest hospital. The guests stood frozen in disbelief. No one had expected this. A poor farmer, with his battered horse, was doing what none of them would. The crowd was stunned, their eyes wide with astonishment as John and Robin disappeared into the night, heading toward the hope of saving the boy's life. Sam, still kneeling beside the pool, watched in shock. The moment was surreal. His son's life was now in the hands of the man he had once looked down upon. The night air was cool and thick with tension as John urged Robin to run faster. The horse's hooves pounded against the dirt road, each step a desperate plea for time. The boy, still unconscious on Robin's back, barely moved, his life hanging by a thread. John's heart hammered in his chest, matching the rhythm of Robin's galloping feet. Every second felt like a lifetime. "Hurry, Robin. Please, hurry," John whispered under his breath, his grip tightening on the reins. The winding road seemed endless, the dark shadows of the trees blurring past them. John's mind raced, flashing, between hope and fear. What if they didn't make it? What if the boy's tiny, fragile body couldn't hold on much longer? The wind whipped against John's face, but he barely noticed. His focus was solely on the horse in front of him, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. He could hear Robin's breath growing heavier, the horse pushing itself to the limit, just like John was. The town lights finally appeared in the distance, faint but real. Relief flickered in John's chest, but it was quickly replaced by dread. What if they were too late? Every beat of his heart counted as they raced against time, the stakes higher than ever. John pulled Robin to a halt in front of the hospital just as the first light of dawn began to break. His heart thudded in his chest, heavy with both exhaustion and anxiety. With shaking hands, he lifted the boy off Robin's back and rushed toward the hospital entrance, hoping against hope that they were not too late. The doors of the hospital swung open, and a team of doctors rushed out, their faces tense as they saw the child in John's arms. Without a word, they took the boy from him, moving swiftly as they carried him inside. John stood frozen in the doorway, his breath ragged as he watched the medical team disappear with the child. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as John paced back and forth, his thoughts a whirlwind of worry. Did I get him here in time? Is he going to be okay? His mind kept replaying the moments before, seeing the boy limp in his arms, feeling Robin's gallop beneath him as they raced through the night. The minutes felt like hours. Each passing second was a cruel reminder that the boy's life was still hanging in the balance. Would his efforts be enough? Would he be able to save him? The suspense gripped John, leaving him helpless in the sterile, cold hospital hallway. The door to the waiting room slammed open, and Sam stormed in, his face red with fury. His steps were heavy, filled with anger and confusion. "What on earth were you thinking?" he barked at John, his voice sharp and cold. "You took my son without my permission. I told you to wait for the car. You should have asked first." John flinched at the billionaire's words, feeling a wave of guilt wash over him. But before he could respond, a doctor entered the room, his face serious. He glanced at Sam and then at John. "Mr. Sam," the doctor began, "I need to speak with you." He paused for a moment, his eyes flicking between the two men. "If this man," he said, nodding toward John, "had been even 5 minutes later in getting your son here, he wouldn't have made it. The boy's condition was critical. He needed immediate medical care." Sam's angry expression faltered. His eyes widened in disbelief, and he glanced back at John, as if seeing him for the first time. "You saved him," Sam whispered, his voice quiet with awe. "You really saved him." John stood still, the weight of the doctor's words sinking in. He had been right. He had acted quickly enough, and it had made all the difference. But now, as Sam's shock turned to gratitude, John couldn't help but feel a sense of humility. The situation was far more complicated than he had imagined. Sam stood there for a moment, his eyes still wide with disbelief, before stepping forward. His once harsh expression softened, replaced by something unexpected: gratitude. He placed a hand on John's shoulder, his voice trembling. I don't know what to say," Sam whispered, his tone full of emotion. "You saved my son's life. You're a hero, John. I was wrong. I'm so sorry for how I treated you." Tears welled up in Sam's eyes, and for the first time, John saw the true depth of the billionaire's vulnerability. The man who had once seemed untouchable, so wrapped up in his wealth and power, was now standing before him, humbled by the selflessness of a poor farmer. The guests from the party, who had mocked John earlier, slowly began to filter into the room. They stood in silence, their faces flushed with shame. The realization hit them hard. They had laughed at a man who had just risked everything to save a life, while they had done nothing but stand by. One by one, they lowered their heads, avoiding John's gaze. The arrogance that had defined them earlier was now replaced by an uncomfortable silence. They felt ashamed, embarrassed by their selfishness, and it was clear they knew they could never undo the mockery they had shown. Sam turned to face them, his voice now firm. "This man, John, is the one who saved my son's life. He deserves more than all of you could ever offer. He's the real hero here." The tension in the room shifted. What had begun as an uncomfortable silence was now a moment of reflection. For everyone present, they had witnessed an act of true courage and kindness, something that no amount of wealth could ever buy. Sam turned his gaze to Robin, who stood quietly outside the hospital, patiently waiting. The once mocked horse, with his worn-out saddle and humble appearance, now stood as a quiet symbol of bravery. Sam's eyes softened as he looked at the horse, his voice filled with newfound respect. "And Robin," Sam said, his words filled with admiration. "I have to admit, I never imagined a horse like this could do what he did. He's the real hero, too. Without him, none of this would have been possible." John looked at his horse, a sense of pride swelling within him. Robin had been his loyal companion for years, carrying him through tough times, never complaining, always steady. Yet today, the horse had proven his worth in a way no one could have ever predicted. The guests, who had once laughed at Robin, ridiculed him for his age and appearance, now stood in awe. They were witnessing a story they would never forget, the story of a man and his horse, whose loyalty and courage had saved a life when no one else would act. "Look at him," Sam said, pointing to Robin. "What a horse! What a symbol of true loyalty and courage." His voice grew more thoughtful. "You know, I've learned something today. It's not the wealth, not the fancy cars or clothes that define a person or an animal. It's what's in their hearts." John nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude as he patted Robin's neck. The horse had proven everyone wrong, and in doing so, he had earned a place in their hearts forever. As the tension in the hospital room began to ease, Sam motioned for John to follow him. "Come with me," he said, his voice still filled with gratitude. John followed, unsure of what was happening next. In a private room, Sam turned to him, his face now full of warmth. "I've been thinking, John. You've not only saved my son's life, but you've also shown me the true meaning of courage and loyalty. I owe you everything." With that, Sam began to hand John several carefully wrapped packages, each one more expensive than the last. A stack of cash, enough to take care of John's family for years. A deed to a piece of land. A vast plot that would offer John a future beyond his wildest dreams. And a final gift, a handshake, solid and meaningful. "Consider us friends now," Sam said. "Anything you need, it's yours." John's eyes widened at the gifts, the weight of them almost too much to comprehend. But as he looked at the cash, the land, and all that Sam had offered, he felt something deeper. Despite the material wealth being handed to him, John remained humble. "I don't need all of this, Sam," he said, his voice steady but full of gratitude. "I just wanted to help." Sam smiled, his eyes filled with respect. "But you deserve it, John. You've earned it. And I promise you'll always have a friend in me." John left that day with his life transformed, but he walked with the same quiet dignity as he always had. With Robin by his side, he knew that true wealth wasn't in what he had received, but in the hearts he had touched, and the friend he had made in Sam. As John made his way home, the gifts from Sam tucked safely away, the mansion's guests were left to reflect on what had just happened. The laughter and mockery they had once directed at John and Robin had faded into the past, replaced by a deep sense of shame. The story of the poor farmer who saved a life was now the topic of their conversations, and it carried an important lesson that none of them could forget. In the quiet of the mansion, Sam spoke to his guests, his voice filled with wisdom. "Wealth isn't about how much you have, it's about who you are. It's about the kindness you show, the courage you possess, and the loyalty you give." John taught us all that today. The guests, once so wrapped up in their own riches, now found themselves humbled by the simplicity of John's actions. They had learned that the true value in life wasn't measured in money or possessions, but in the hearts of those who truly cared. Back at his humble farm, John found his life transformed, not just by the gifts he had received, but by the respect and dignity that came with them. His children, once hungry, were now able to eat their fill. His family had a future ahead of them. But more than anything, John carried with him a new sense of pride, not in his newfound wealth, but in the knowledge that he had made a difference when it mattered most. As he looked at Robin standing beside him, John knew that they had both earned something far greater than riches, true respect and admiration. And that, he realized, was the greatest gift of all.